The Arizona desert doesn't just kill you with heat, it kills you with silence, with solitude. For Leora Vance, that silence was a fortress she'd built around her heart. But the day the sky turned black with sand and fury, a different kind of silence was delivered to her doorstep, the near silent breath of a man buried alive by the storm. She had a choice: leave him to the desert that had claimed him, or drag the dangerous unknown into her home. Her choice that day would not just defy the storm, it would defy an entire world of hate, prejudice, and blood feuds, for the dying man she saved was no ordinary drifter. He was a secret that could get them both killed. The sky over the Superstition Mountains had been a placid, bleached-out blue for weeks, a cruel canvas for the relentless sun that baked the life out of everything. Leora Vance, known to the few who knew her as Ellie, understood the language of this land. She knew the subtle shift in the air, the way the lizard sought deeper cover, the nervous rustle of the brittle bush. On this particular afternoon, the air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken threat. A low, ominous hum vibrated from the west, a sound less heard than felt in the bones. A haboob was coming. Her homestead, which she grimly called Last Chance, was a testament to stubbornness. A small, sturdy cabin built by her father, Liam Vance, a lean-to for her mule Beatrice, and a well that was more precious than gold. It was all she had left after the fever took her parents, and a Comanche raid took her brother. At 24, her hands were calloused, her face tanned and etched with the fine lines of constant squinting, and her heart was guarded with the same fierce resolve she used to protect her well from drying up. When the horizon dissolved into a monstrous rolling wall of brown, she didn't panic. Routine took over. She secured Beatrice in the lean-to, latched the heavy shutters over her cabin's 2 small windows, and stuffed a damp rag into the gap beneath the door. Then she lit a single kerosene lamp, its flickering flame a tiny defiant star against the coming apocalypse. The storm hit not with a roar, but with a suffocating crush. The world outside vanished. The wind shrieked like a banshee, hurling sand and grit against the cabin walls with the force of buckshot. Inside, the air grew thick with dust that seeped through invisible cracks. Ellie sat at her small hand-hewn table, a shotgun resting across her lap, and waited. Storms like this were nature's way of reshuffling the deck, and you never knew what predators, 4-legged or 2, it might spit out. It lasted for hours. The sun was blotted out, plunging the day into a terrifying sepia-toned twilight. When the wind's howl finally subsided to a mournful moan, an eerie silence descended, broken only by the soft hiss of settling sand. Ellie waited another hour listening before unlatching the door. The world was remade. Drifts of fine red sand were piled against her cabin, like snowdrifts, the landscape sculpted into new alien shapes. The air was still hazy, tasting of grit and ozone. She took a canteen and her shotgun, her eyes scanning the transformed terrain. It was during this survey, her gaze sweeping over a newly formed dune near a cluster of skeletal ocotillo, that she saw it. At first, she thought it was a bundle of discarded rags or a dead coyote. But as she drew closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a man face down, only the dark fabric of his tunic and the black shock of his hair visible above the sand that had partially buried him. He was lying unnervingly still. Caution, the desert's most vital lesson, screamed at her. He could be a bandit, an outlaw playing possum, but her father's voice, a gentle echo in her memory, whispered a different lesson. You don't leave a man to the buzzards, Ellie girl. Not even your worst enemy. She approached slowly, the stock of her shotgun cool against her shoulder. She nudged his side with the toe of her boot. A faint, almost imperceptible groan was the only response. He was alive. Barely. With a sigh that was part resignation, part dread, she knelt. He was Native American Apache by the look of his high cheekbones and the style of his leather tunic, though it was ripped and stained. His skin was grey beneath its natural bronze, his lips cracked and blue. Dehydration was killing him, but that wasn't all. As she worked to dig his arm free from the sand, she saw the dark, ugly stain blooming on his side, and another on his shoulder. Her stomach tightened. These weren't wounds from being tossed by a storm. They were deliberate. One looked like a bullet graze, but the other on his side was a ragged, angry puncture. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. Gritting her teeth, she looped her arms under his, planting her boots in the shifting sand, and dragged. Every step was a battle. The 100 yards to her cabin felt like a mile. Beatrice watched from the lean-to with what seemed like reproachful eyes. "Don't you start, you stubborn beast!" Ellie muttered, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "I'm already regretting this." She hauled him inside, the scent of dust, sweat, and blood filling her small, clean space. She maneuvered him onto the cot that served as her guest bed, though it had never held a guest. His head lolled to the side, his breathing a shallow, rattling whisper. For a long moment, she just stood there, hands on her hips, staring at the man who was now her problem. He was an Apache, in the Arizona Territory of 1878. Bringing an Apache warrior, even a half-dead one, into your home was tantamount to treason. It was a death sentence if the wrong people found out. Her eyes fell on his face. Even slack with near death, it was a strong face, carved from the very rock and canyons of this land. There was a nobility there that warred with his current pathetic state. He was someone's son, someone's brother. "Damn you, Liam Vance," she whispered to the empty room, her father's ghost smiling sadly at her predicament. She fetched her medical supplies, a bottle of carbolic acid clean rags, and a needle and thread. The desert had thrown down a challenge, and despite every instinct for self-preservation, Ellie Vance was not a woman to back down. Woman, too. As she began the painstaking work of cleaning his wounds, she was completely unaware that the life she was saving belonged to Kyle Blackwood, the firstborn son of the great Chiricahua chieftain, Taza, a man whose disappearance was about to set the entire territory on fire. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a series of violent, disconnected shocks. Pain sharp and searing in his side. A thirst so profound it felt as if his tongue had turned to sandpaper. The scent of wood smoke, and something foreign, something clean, like lye soap. And a presence, a light, quiet movement that did not belong to the world he knew. Kyle's eyes snapped open. The first thing he saw was the low-timbered ceiling of a small cabin. White man's work. Panic, cold and sharp, jolted through him, but his body refused to obey the command to rise. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and a groan escaped his lips, a sound of weakness he despised. "Easy now," a voice said. It was a woman's voice, low and steady with a surprising lack of alarm. "You try to move, you'll tear my stitches." He turned his head, the effort immense. She was sitting in a chair by the hearth, cleaning the barrel of a shotgun. The lamplight cast a warm glow on her face, illuminating determined brown eyes, a spray of freckles across her nose, and strands of sun-lightened brown hair escaping a practical braid. She wasn't smiling. She simply watched him, her expression a careful, unreadable mask. He said nothing. His mind raced, piecing together fragments. The ambush, Nakoma's triumphant sneer, the searing pain of the arrow, its tip surely poisoned with rattlesnake venom to finish the job slowly. The betrayal of his own cousins, their eyes filled with envy and greed. They had dragged him, left him for dead, and the storm. The storm was supposed to have been his tomb. This woman, this Zan, a white woman, had found him. Why pity? A desire for a bounty. He had to be careful. In his world, a moment of weakness was a fatal one. Water, she said, as if reading his most immediate need. She stood, laying the shotgun aside, but keeping it within easy reach, and brought a tin cup to his lips. He drank the cool liquid, a miracle on his parched throat. He didn't thank her. He watched her, his eyes narrowed, cataloguing every detail. She was alone. The cabin was small but meticulously kept. There was a quiet strength in the way she moved, a self-sufficiency that spoke of a life lived on the edge. For 3 days, a tense silence reigned in the cabin. Ellie tended to his wounds with a practiced, impersonal efficiency. She had managed to draw the poison from the arrow wound, a nasty gash that was inflamed and feverish, using a heated poultice of desert herbs her father had taught her to identify. The bullet graze on his shoulder was clean, already scabbing over. She fed him broth and water, never asking questions, and never showing fear even when his fever spiked, and he thrashed in delirium, shouting words in his native Chiricahua tongue. Kyle, for his part, remained a stone wall. He understood her English perfectly. His father, a pragmatist, had ensured he learned the white man's tongue as a tool for negotiation and survival. But he chose not to speak it. It was a test. He watched her, gauging her reactions. He saw no pity in her eyes, only a grim resolve. He saw no greed, only weary practicality. She wasn't trying to save his soul or turn him in. She was simply keeping him alive. It was a puzzle he couldn't solve. On the 4th day, the fever broke. He woke, drenched in sweat, his mind clear for the first time. Ellie was standing at the window, staring out at the vast, empty expanse. "The fever's gone," she stated, not turning around. "You'll live, supposing no one comes looking for you." He pushed himself up on one elbow, the pull on his side, a sharp reminder of his injury. He decided it was time to break his silence. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. But the English words were clear and unaccented. Ellie turned, one eyebrow slightly raised. There was no surprise, only a flicker of something else, vindication, perhaps. "Name's Leora Vance. Folks call me Ellie. This is my land. You are alone," he observed. It was not a question. "I am," she confirmed, her tone daring him to make something of it. "Why did you help me?" He pressed his gaze, intense. "My people and your people are not friends." She walked back to the hearth and picked up the poker, idly stoking the small fire. "My father taught me you don't leave a man to die in the desert, no matter who he is." Seemed like a waste of good hate. "Besides," she added, her eyes meeting his, a glint of steel in them, "you weren't just caught in a storm. Someone shot you and stuck you with a poisoned arrow. I figured anyone with enemies that determined might be worth more alive than dead. Curiosity, you could call it." His respect for her deepened. She was no fool. She had seen the truth of his condition. She knew he was dangerous, not just because of who he was, but because of who was after him. "My name is Kyle," he offered a partial truth. A name without a clan was a name without power, a name without threat. "All right, Kyle," she said, nodding slowly. "You can stay until you're strong enough to ride. I've got a spare bedroll. You can sleep by the fire. But we have rules. First, no surprises. You don't bring your war to my door. This homestead is neutral ground. Second, you pull your weight as soon as you can stand. And third," she paused, her gaze locking with his, "you try anything. Anything at all. And that shotgun isn't just for show. I'm a damn good shot." Kyle looked at the woman before him. She was offering him shelter, a temporary truce, in a world that wanted him dead. She was fierce and pragmatic, her compassion wrapped in layers of hardened caution. He had been raised among the strongest warriors of the Chiricahua, had seen courage in many forms. But this quiet, solitary woman's bravery was of a different kind. It was the bravery of survival, of defying the odds day in and day out. Slowly he gave a single deliberate nod. I understand, Leora Vance. An unspoken pact was sealed in the small cabin, a fragile alliance between two people from warring worlds forged in the heart of the storm. They were a patient and a nurse, a fugitive and a reluctant savior, each a mystery to the other, unaware that their simple agreement was the first step on a path that would lead them both into far greater danger than either could imagine. The days that followed settled into a quiet, watchful rhythm. The vast empty silence of the desert seeped back into the small cabin, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was filled with the weight of two lives, two histories circling each other like wary predators. Kyle was a disciplined patient. He pushed his body to heal his warrior's training, overriding the pain. As soon as he could stand without dizziness, he began to follow Ellie's second rule. He started with small tasks, splitting kindling, hauling buckets of water from the well, a task he performed with a slow, measured gait that betrayed the agony in his side. Ellie watched him, her expression unreadable. She never offered help, sensing it would be an insult to his pride. Communication between them was sparse, functional. Pass the salt, more wood for the fire. That shutter needs fixing. Yet in their shared tasks, a non-verbal language began to form. He saw the way she meticulously organized her supplies, a hedge against scarcity. She noticed how he moved with a silent, fluid grace, even when injured his awareness of his surroundings absolute. He was a man who belonged to the wilderness in a way she, for all her years at last chance, never could. She was a survivor in the desert. He was a part of it. One evening after a simple meal of beans and jerky, Ellie was cleaning her father's old rifle, her movements precise and familiar. Kyle sat across the small table, sharpening a skinning knife. He carried the rhythmic shh-shh of stone against steel, a calming sound in the quiet room. "You know how to use that?" he asked, nodding toward the rifle. "My father taught me," she replied without looking up. "He used to say, 'The desert gives you one chance to learn a lesson. The second time it buries you.' I learned to shoot." He was a wise man, Kyle said, his voice low. "He was a good man," she corrected softly. A flicker of old pain crossed her face, a crack in her hardened exterior. "He's gone. Fever took him and my mother. My brother Jacob. He was killed in a raid." She said the last part, flatly, a statement of fact, not an accusation. But the word hung in the air between them. Raid. Her family had been torn apart by people like him. Kyle stopped his work, his dark eyes fixed on her. He could see the ghosts she lived with, the same way he lived with his own. "My mother was killed by soldiers," he said, the words costing him. "They came to our winter camp at dawn. They said they were looking for warriors who had stolen cattle. They found women and children. It did not matter to them." Ellie looked up, her hands still on the rifle. In his eyes, she saw not hatred, but a profound, bottomless grief that mirrored her own. For the first time, she saw him not as an Apache, not as a potential threat, but as a man who had also lost everything. The chasm between their worlds for just a moment seemed a little less wide. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and the words were genuine. He gave a slight acknowledging nod, and the moment passed. But something had shifted. The foundation of a fragile trust had been laid, built not on words, but on a shared understanding of loss. A few days later, the water in her rain barrel ran low. The well provided for drinking, but for washing and other chores, she relied on the infrequent rains. Kyle saw her staring at the nearly empty barrel, a familiar worry line creasing her brow. "There is water," he said, looking towards a series of low rocky hills a mile east of the cabin. Ellie followed his gaze. "There, that's just a dry wash. It hasn't seen water in months. The rock holds it," he explained. "Underneath. You have to know where to listen." The next morning he led her out, carrying 2 empty buckets. He was still walking stiffly, but his strength was returning. He took her to the rocky wash, a place she had passed 100 times, and dismissed as useless. He stopped closing his eyes, his head tilted, as if listening to a secret conversation. He walked a few paces, knelt and pressed his ear against a large, flat slab of sandstone. After a moment, he pointed to a spot beside it. Here he said, "Dig." Skeptical, Ellie took her small shovel and began to dig into the sandy soil at the base of the rock. At first, there was only dry dirt. But as she went deeper, the soil grew darker, then damp. A foot down, it turned to mud. 2 feet down, a small puddle of clear, cool water began to seep into the hole. Within an hour, it was a small, life-giving pool, enough to fill their buckets twice over. Ellie stood staring in amazement from the water to Kale. He hadn't used magic. He had used knowledge, an ancient wisdom passed down through generations. He had shown her a secret of the land she thought she knew so well. "How did you?" she began. "My grandfather taught me," he said simply. "The earth speaks. You only have to learn its language." That afternoon, as she washed her clothes in the precious water he had found, she watched him from the cabin door. He was standing at the edge of her property, facing the distant mountains of his homeland, his posture regal and proud, despite his tattered clothes. A hawk circled high above him, catching a thermal. He was a chieftain's son. She didn't know the fact of it, but she could feel the truth of it in his bearing. He was a king in exile. And in that moment, Leora Vance acknowledged a dangerous, terrifying truth. Her carefully constructed fortress of solitude had been breached. The man she had dragged from the sand was no longer just a patient, a problem, or a threat. He was Kale, and her carefully guarded heart was in more danger than it had been in years. With Kyle's strength returning, a new tension settled over the last chance homestead. The question of his departure loomed unspoken, but ever present. He was no longer an invalid confined to the cabin. He was a warrior, regaining his power. And Ellie's small plot of land felt increasingly like a cage for a tethered eagle. He spent hours outside his eyes, scanning the horizon, his body reacclimating to the harsh sun, his movements regaining their lethal fluidity. Ellie found herself watching him, a knot of anxiety, and a confusing flutter of another emotion tightening in her stomach. His presence had become a part of her daily rhythm. The quiet companionship, the shared meals, the low murmur of his voice, as he sometimes told her stories of the stars, which his people called the nighttime campfires of the gods. His world was seeping into hers, and the thought of the silence returning to her cabin was now a source of dread. The outside world intruded on a blistering, hot Tuesday. Ellie was mending a harness in the shade of the lean-to when she heard the unmistakable sound of a shod horse. It wasn't Kyle's light-footed tread. It was the plodding gait of a grain-fed horse, the kind settlers owned. Her heart leaped into her throat. Inside. Now she hissed at Kyle, who was carving a piece of wood nearby. He didn't question her. He vanished into the cabin as silently as a shadow. She grabbed her shotgun, her knuckles white, and walked to the front of the cabin, just as a rider came into view. It was Jebediah Croft, her nearest neighbor, a gaunt, weasel-faced man who lived 5 miles east and whose main pastime was collecting gossip and grievances. Afternoon Leora. He called out his thin lips, twisting into what he probably thought was a friendly smile. He remained on his horse, his shifty eyes taking in every detail of her homestead. Ain't seen you in a while. Figured I'd check you hadn't dried up and blown away. I'm fine, Jebediah, Ellie said, her voice flat. She kept the shotgun held loosely, its muzzle pointed at the ground, but ready. What do you want? Just friendly concern, he said, though his eyes lingered on the well, then on the 2 tin cups sitting on her washing bench. 2. Heard some news in town. Figured you ought to know. There's trouble brewing. A U.S. Army patrol came through Redemption last week. From Fort Lowell, Ellie's blood ran cold. What kind of trouble, Apache? Trouble what else, he spat. Seems the son of the big chief, Taza Blackwood, has gone renegade. Killed 2 of his own tribe, they say, and tried to start a war party against the whites. A real bloodthirsty one, name of Cale. The patrol's got orders to hunt him down, shoot on sight. There's a $500 bounty on his head. Ellie's face remained a stony mask, but inside her world tilted on its axis. Kyle. The name struck her like a physical blow. Not just a renegade, but the chieftain's son. The lies he was accused of starting a war were the exact opposite of the man she had come to know, a man who spoke of his mother's death at the hands of soldiers with sorrow, not vengeance. They say he was last seen heading into the superstitions right before that big haboob Jebediah continued, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Funny thing that. Storm kicks up and a dangerous renegade just disappears into thin air right on your doorstep. The desert's big, Jebediah. Ellie said, her voice dangerously quiet. It swallows a lot of things. That it does? He mused, his gaze once again flicking to the 2 cups. Just be careful, Leora. Harboring a wanted man is a hanging offense, especially an Apache. He tipped his hat, a mocking gesture, and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and palpable menace in his wake. Ellie leaned against the cabin wall, her legs suddenly weak. She took a deep breath and went inside. Kyle was standing in the shadows, his face grim. He had heard every word. So she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and accusation. A chieftain's son, a renegade, a murderer. There's a $500 bounty on your head, Cale. He met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a pain that cut her to the quick. The part about being the son of Taza Blackwood is true. The rest is a lie. He stepped forward into the lamplight, and for the first time, he told her the full story. He spoke of Nakama, his cousin, a warrior, consumed by jealousy and ambition. Nakoma believed the only way for the Apache to survive was through total war. He saw Kyle's measured diplomacy and his knowledge of the white man's world not as a strength, but as a corruption, a weakness. Nakoma wants to be chieftain. Kyle explained, his voice low and intense. He knows my father would never name him successor. So he sought to remove me. He and his followers, men who listened to his songs of war, they ambushed me. The 2 men he claims I killed were my own guards, loyal to me. They died trying to protect me. Nakoma shot me, then used a poison arrow to ensure the desert would finish the job. He returned to our people with a story of my treachery, that I had tried to force them onto a war path and killed those who opposed me. Ellie sank onto a stool, the shotgun now heavy and useless in her hands. It all made a terrible kind of sense. The attack, the specific wounds, his presence here. He wasn't running from the white man's law. He was running from a traitor among his own people. The army patrol is just a tool for him, Kyle continued. If the soldiers find me and kill me, it proves Nakoma's story. It solidifies his power. He will use my death to ignite the flames of war he so desperately wants, a war that will be the end of my people. The stakes were suddenly so much higher than she could have ever imagined. This wasn't just about hiding a man. It was about the fate of an entire tribe, about a looming war that would soak the desert in blood. And she, Leora Vance, was standing right in the middle of it. "You have to go." She said the words, tasting like ash. "You have to go back to your father. You have to tell him the truth." "I know," Kyle said. His eyes found hers, and in their depths she saw not only the gravity of his mission, but also a profound regret. "But to leave here, Leora, is to bring this danger to you. That man Jebediah, he suspects. He will watch you. When I am gone, he may bring others. I can handle Jebediah Croft," she said, with more confidence than she felt. He took a step closer, his presence filling the small space. He reached out his fingers, gently tracing the worry line on her forehead. His touch was like a brand, a spark in the desolate landscape of her life. "You have shown me Jun Chasian," he said, his voice a near whisper. "The great seated mountain's spirit. Kindness in a harsh land. I will not forget it, and I will not see it harmed." The shadow of his past had found them, and it was longer and darker than she could have ever feared. His fight was now her fight, and as she looked into the eyes of the hunted chieftain's son, she knew that his departure would be a wound far deeper than any she had ever known. The knowledge of Kyle's true identity settled between them, heavy and transformative. He was no longer just Kyle the quiet survivor. He was Kyle Blackwood, heir to a legacy, a focal point of a deadly political struggle. The cabin, once a simple refuge, now felt like the calm eye of a hurricane. Every rustle of the wind, every distant coyote call sent a jolt of apprehension through Ellie. Kyle knew he couldn't stay. Every day he remained at last chance, he endangered the woman who had saved him. His wounds had healed into angry scars, and his full strength had returned. It was time. The decision was made silently one morning. Ellie watched as he gathered his few possessions, his knife a small pouch of herbs she'd given him a length of rope. He moved with a heavy heart, the burden of his mission warring with a clear reluctance to leave. That evening, their last together, they sat outside as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The oppressive heat of the day gave way to the desert's cool evening breath. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "When you find your father," Ellie said, finally breaking the silence, her voice quiet, "what will you do? Nakoma has turned many of your people against you. I will not challenge Nakoma with weapons." Kyle replied, his gaze fixed on the mountains that were his home. "That is what he wants. It would divide the tribe and lead to bloodshed. I must challenge him with truth. There are elders who knew my heart, who respect my father. I must convince them. The truth is a slower arrow than poison, but it flies truer. It's a great risk," she murmured. "They might kill you before you speak a single word." "It is a risk I must take," he said. He turned to look at her, his face illuminated by the dying light. "My father taught me that a leader's life does not belong to him. It belongs to his people. Nakoma would lead them to ruin. I cannot allow that." In his words, she heard the weight of his birthright, the profound sense of duty that guided him. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for a future for his tribe. The admiration she felt for him was a painful, aching thing. He reached into the tunic she had mended for him and pulled out a small, intricately beaded amulet on a leather cord. It depicted a single, soaring hawk. "This was my mother's," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She gave it to me when I was a boy. She said it would protect me, to remind me to see the world from above, not just the ground beneath my feet. To see the whole truth of things. He held it out to her. I want you to have it. Ellie's breath hitched. Kyle, I can't. This is yours, your family. You are now a part of my story. Leora Vance, he said, his eyes intense and unwavering. You have a spirit as strong as any Chiricahua woman. You faced the storm. You faced my own people's treachery. And you didn't flinch. This belongs with you. To keep you safe. His fingers brushed hers as he pressed the amulet into her palm. The warmth of his touch lingered long after he pulled away. She closed her hand around it, the smooth beads a tangible link to him, to his world, to the impossible connection that had grown between them. The stars began to appear cold and brilliant in the deepening indigo sky. Ellie, he said her name, a soft prayer on his lips. He moved closer, and the space between them crackled with unspoken feelings. He gently cupped her face in his hand, his thumb stroking her cheek. In my language, there is not a simple word for goodbye. We say, Guju Nashadu. It means, may you walk in beauty. Tears she hadn't realized were forming welled in her eyes. And you, Kyle Blackwood, she whispered, her voice breaking. He leaned in his hesitation, a breath of a moment, and then his lips met hers. The kiss was not one of desperate passion, but of profound tenderness and sorrowful farewell. It was a kiss that held the quiet intimacy of their shared days, the respect they had for one another, and the heartbreaking reality of their divided worlds. It was the taste of loss and the promise of a memory that would sustain them both through the trials to come. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against hers for a long moment. I will see you again, he vowed, a promise that seemed impossible. When this is done, I will return. Before dawn, he was gone. Ellie stood at her cabin door, the hawk amulet clutched in her hand, and watched the eastern sky slowly lighten. The homestead was silent again, but it was a hollow, aching silence, now filled with the ghost of his presence. He had walked back into his world of danger and duty, leaving her alone in hers. The unveiling was complete. She knew who he was, what he was fighting for, and what he meant to her. And as the sun rose over the Superstition Mountains, Leora Vance knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that her own fight had just begun. Jebediah would be back, the soldiers would be searching, and her heart was now tied to the fate of a renegade chieftain's son. Kale moved through the canyons and mesas of his homeland like a phantom. The land he knew so well was now hostile territory. Every rock could hide an enemy, every breeze could carry a warning. He avoided the main trails, subsisting on what the desert offered his senses, honed to a razor's edge. His journey was fueled by two things: the burning need to clear his name, and the haunting memory of Ellie's face, of her strength, of the promise he had made to her. After a week of traveling by night and hiding by day, he reached the foothills of the Chiricahua Mountains, where his people had made their hidden rancheria. He did not enter the main camp. Instead, he sought out the wickiup of an old warrior named Geronimo, a distant uncle whose wisdom was surpassed only by his suspicion of outsiders and internal politics. Kyle trusted him. He revealed himself under the cloak of darkness. The old man's eyes, sharp and intelligent, studied him intensely. "They say you are dead," Geronimo said, his voice like stones grinding together. "They say you tried to lead the young warriors to war and killed those who stood against you." "It is Nakoma's lie," Kyle stated, meeting the elder's gaze without flinching. "He ambushed me. He left me for the storm to bury. He wants my father's place, and he will spill the blood of our people and the whites to get it." Geronimo listened, his face impassive, as Cale recounted the entire story. He spoke of the poisoned arrow, a coward's weapon, and of the woman who had saved him. When he finished, the old man was silent for a long time. "Nakoma's words have made the young men restless," Geronimo finally said. "He speaks of honor and revenge, and they listen. Your father, Taza, is old. His heart is heavy with the loss of his son. He believes Nakoma's story. The words were a blow, but Cale had expected them. Then I must speak to him. I must face the council. To do so is to face your own death sentence," Geronimo warned. "Nakoma will demand it." "It is a risk I must take," Cale repeated, his resolve unshaken. Meanwhile, back at Last Chance, Ellie's world was shrinking. Just as Cale had predicted, Jebediah Croft's suspicion had curdled into open hostility. He had ridden back to the dusty town of Redemption and spun a tale. He spoke of seeing signs of a second person at the Vance homestead, of Leora's secretive and defensive behavior. He planted the seed that she, the quiet homesteader, was an Indian lover, the most venomous accusation one could level in the territory. The change was immediate. When she rode into town for supplies, the friendly nods from other settlers were replaced with cold stares. Martha, the general store owner's wife, who used to trade recipes with her, now served her in stony silence. A group of rough-looking miners lounging outside the saloon muttered insults as she passed. One afternoon, Sergeant McTavish and his patrol returned. They didn't just ask questions this time, they searched her property. McTavish was a hard, by-the-book soldier, but he seemed to take no pleasure in his duty. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gruff, as his men ransacked her small cabin. "Rumor has it you've been harboring our fugitive." "Rumors are cheap," Sergeant Ellie replied, standing her ground, her arms crossed. "Jebediah Croft has a grudge and a big mouth. You'll find nothing here." They found nothing, of course. Kyle had been meticulous, but as they were leaving, one of the younger soldiers pointed to the ground near the well. "Sergeant, look at this." It was the small hole Cale had dug, now partially filled in. McTavish knelt, scooping up a handful of the still damp earth. He looked from the soil to the dry wash in the distance, then back to Ellie, his eyes filled with a new, hard suspicion. "This land is bone dry, Mrs. Vance." "But you've got fresh water," he stated. "That's an old Apache trick, finding water like that." He didn't say anything more, but he didn't have to. The seed of doubt was now planted in his mind as well. They left, but Ellie knew they would be back. She was now a prisoner on her own land, watched by her neighbors and suspected by the law. Her loneliness was a physical weight. She would hold the hawk amulet Kyle had given her, its smooth beads a comfort in the dark and worry. Had he made it? Was he safe, or had he walked right into the trap his cousin had set? In the Chiricahua camp, Kyle's fate hung by a thread. Geronimo arranged a council with Chief Taza and the elders. When Kyle walked into the circle, gasps of shock and anger rippled through the crowd. Nakoma, standing beside the chief, his face a mask of false piety, reacted with fury. "He lives!" Nakoma shouted, pointing an accusing finger. "The traitor returns. He should be executed for his crimes against our people." But Kyle did not look at Nakoma. His eyes were only for his father. Chief Taza looked a decade older, his face a roadmap of grief and strain. Father Kyle said, his voice ringing with authority. "I have not come to fight. I have come to speak the truth." He laid his weapons on the ground, a gesture of peace. Step by step, he dismantled Nakoma's lies. He showed them the scar from the bullet graze and the ragged, puckered mark on his side. "This is from Nakoma's arrow," he declared. "An arrow tipped with snake venom, meant to let the desert finish his cowardly work. Ask him to show you his honor. Ask him why he told you I was dead before the storm had even passed. How could he know unless he was the one who left me there?" the elders murmured. The logic was sound. Kyle turned his attention to the warriors Nakoma had swayed. "Nakoma promises you war and glory," Kyle said, his voice rising with passion. "I have seen the white man's towns. I have seen their railroads that bring more soldiers every day. A war would not be our glory. It would be our grave. Our strength is not in fighting their numbers, but in our wisdom, in our knowledge of this land, in our unity. A unity Nakoma seeks to destroy for his own power." A tense standoff ensued. The tribe was split. Chief Taza, torn between his son's powerful testimony and the poison Nakoma had fed him, was paralyzed with indecision. Finally, Geronimo spoke. "There is only one way, a trial by combat. Let the spirits decide the truth." Nakoma smiled a predator's grin. He was stronger, faster, and Kyle was not fully recovered. It was a fight he was sure he would win. Kyle looked at his father, then at his people. He had not wanted this. He had not wanted more bloodshed, but he saw no other way. "I accept," Kyle said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. The two worlds, once miles apart, were now on a collision course. Ellie was isolated and under suspicion, a lone woman against a hostile community. Kyle was facing a fight to the death to save his people from a ruinous war. Neither knew that Nakoma, cornered and desperate, was about to make one last treacherous move that would bring their two worlds crashing together in violence and fire. Nakoma knew his position was precarious. Kyle's words had planted seeds of doubt among the elders, and a fair fight was a risk he couldn't afford. He needed to force the situation to create an undeniable act of war that would make Kyle's pleas for peace impossible and cement his own leadership. He needed a target, and he knew exactly who it would be. The white woman, the one Kyle's protector Geronimo had mentioned. Her death at the hands of Apache warriors would be the spark that lit the territory ablaze. He gathered his most loyal followers, a dozen young warriors hungry for a fight, and slipped away from the rancheria under the cover of a moonless night. His plan was simple and brutal: raid the isolated homestead, kill the woman, and leave behind evidence implicating Chief Taza's entire tribe. The army's retaliation would be swift and merciless, forcing the Chiricahua into the war Nakoma craved. Back at the camp, Geronimo's spies brought word of Nakoma's departure. The old warrior immediately went to Kyle. "He has gone," Geronimo rasped. "He and his zealots. They ride west, towards the white settlements." Kyle's blood ran cold. A cold, dreadful certainty seized him. Leora, he breathed. It was the only logical target. An attack on her would not only start a war, it would be Nakoma's ultimate personal revenge against him. Father Kyle strode into the chief's wickiup, his face a storm of fury and resolve. "Nakoma has fled. He goes to murder the woman who saved my life, to start a war in your name. We must ride." Seeing the truth finally clear in his son's eyes, Chief Taza's indecision vanished, replaced by the fire of a lifetime of leadership. "Gather the warriors," he commanded. "We do not ride for war. We ride to stop one. We ride to save the honor of our people." Ellie was securing Beatrice for the night when she heard it. Not the plodding of a single horse, but the thunder of a dozen moving fast. Fear, sharp and metallic, flooded her senses. This wasn't Sergeant McTavish. This was a raid. She sprinted inside, barring the heavy door and grabbing her shotgun. She peered through a small crack in the shutter. In the faint starlight, she saw them warriors, their faces streaked with paint, circling her cabin like wolves. They were not Kyle's people. Their energy was feral chaotic. An arrow thudded into the shutter inches from her face. A war cry split the night. They were testing her defenses, preparing for the final rush. She was trapped. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady on the shotgun. If this was her end, she would not make it an easy one for them. "The desert gives you one chance to learn a lesson," her father's voice echoed. She fired a blast through the window, scattering the warriors closest to the cabin. They answered with a volley of arrows, several thudding deep into the cabin's wooden walls. They began to circle, whooping and shouting, building their courage for a charge that would splinter her door and overwhelm her. She reloaded, her mind racing. She had one more shot before they would be upon her. Just as a large warrior, Nakoma himself, raised a torch to set her roof ablaze. A new sound cut through the night, a piercing, powerful cry from the east. It was a Chiricahua war cry, but it was different. It was disciplined, controlled. Over the rise, a second group of riders appeared, silhouetted against the emerging stars. They were led by a single warrior who rode with unmatched fury and purpose. Kyle. Nakoma froze, torch in hand, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. His trap had been discovered. Kyle and his warriors crashed into Nakoma's flank like a force of nature. It was not a battle, but a swift, brutal reckoning. Kyle's warriors, fighting to preserve peace, were precise and deadly. They were not interested in killing, but in subduing. They disarmed Nakoma's followers with stunning efficiency. The real fight was between Kale and Nakoma. They met in the center of the chaos, a whirlwind of personal hatred. Knives flashed in the starlight. Nakoma was a powerful brawler, driven by raw ambition. But Kyle fought with the cold, focused rage of a man defending everything he held dear, his people, his honor, and the woman locked inside the cabin. He moved with a dancer's grace and a predator's lethality. He deflected Nakoma's wild slashes, using his cousin's own momentum against him. The fight was short and decisive. Kyle disarmed Nakoma, the knife clattering in the dust. He landed a stunning blow to Nakoma's jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. Kyle stood over him, his knife at his cousin's throat, his chest heaving. "This is the war you wanted, Nakoma." Kyle snarled, his voice dangerously low. "A war against our own, a war based on lies." He pressed the blade harder. "Your path ends here." From the cabin, the door creaked open. Ellie stood there, her shotgun still in her hands, her face pale but resolute. "Kyle," she said, her voice steady. Don't become him." Her words cut through his rage. He looked from Nakoma's hate-filled eyes to hers, which were filled with fear, but also with an unwavering belief in him. He pulled the knife away. "He will be taken back," Kyle declared for all to hear. "He will face the Council's justice, not as a warrior, but as a traitor who would lead his people to destruction." The reunion, when it came, was quiet. After Nakoma and his men were bound and secured, Kyle walked towards the cabin. He stopped a few feet from Ellie, his body bruised, his face grim. The chaos of the battle faded, and there was only the vast desert night and the two of them. "You came back," she whispered, the words choked with relief. "I promised," he said. He closed the distance between them, and this time there was no hesitation. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, burying his face in her hair. He felt her tremble, and he held her closer, a silent oath to never let her go again. She wrapped her arms around him, clinging to his strength, the solid, living proof that hope had not been in vain. They stood there for a long time, two survivors from different worlds, clinging to each other in the aftermath of a battle that had nearly torn them apart forever. The reckoning was over. The future was uncertain, a path they would have to carve out for themselves. But in that moment, under the endless canopy of desert stars, they were no longer divided. They were simply Cale and Ellie, and they were home. And so, in the heart of the unforgiving Arizona territory, a new story began. The path for Cale and Leora was not an easy one. Cale returned to his people, not as a renegade, but as a hero who had averted a disastrous war. He took his place beside his aging father, his wisdom and courage earning him the respect Nakoma had tried to steal. Ellie, no longer an outcast, became known as the woman who had stood her ground, a bridge between two cultures that had only known conflict. Their love story wasn't a simple ride into the sunset. It was a daily act of courage, building trust, facing down prejudice from both sides, and forging a future where understanding could triumph over hate. Their life was a testament to the idea that the deepest connections are often found in the most divided of worlds, a quiet homestead, becoming an embassy of peace. If this story of courage, sacrifice, and a love that defied all boundaries moved you, please help us share it with the world. Hit that like button to let us know you are here, and share this video with someone who appreciates a tale of the true Wild West. Most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more stories like this to tell, tales of unsung heroes, impossible romances, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Your support makes it all possible. Thank you for listening.